Welcome to the Cross Counsel Podcast. We believe negative emotions shouldn't run your life. We invite you to take a deep dive into this challenging transformational journey that goes far beyond this podcast. Join Executive Director and expert facilitator Steve Freitag and me, John Crevillian, as we discuss how to deeply experience the love and truth of Jesus. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, John Crevillian, and I'm joined with my co-host today, Steve Freitag. How are you?
I'm good once I found my mouse.
Once you found your mouse?
Yeah.
What happened to it?
Well, and people would think, yeah, the thing you actually physically like.
Yeah.
So I've got my laptop, and then I'm hooked up to a monitor, like a old TV, and and so when that happens, you've got two different screens, and your mouse bounces back and forth. I, for the life of me, for 5 minutes, could not get my mouse to appear on either my laptop or my TV monitor. So that was a whole lot of fun.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So,
was it just like between like?
I don't know. I don't know if the F-35s flying overhead were scaring it away. I almost just turned off the computer and started again. I figured that was how close I was.
Hey, that's the first trick in IT that they teach us. Turn it off and on again.
Right.
Like, man, I remember people would be like, no, it won't fix it. And after like years of working IT, I was like, no, it might though. There's like a 30% chance it might. Right. So let's do that.
But yeah, getting ready for the golf outing that's happening June 25th and all that fun stuff.
It's gonna be so fun.
Yeah, again, by the time this airs, we'll probably be in our last class, I think, in the level 2.
Yeah.
And Mary's still rolling with the peer.
The peer practice.
Peer practice, yes.
Yeah.
It's terrible. I need to remember that.
I always want to say peer pressure, like we're teaching people to bully people, and that's not accurate.
Right. No, that is not accurate.
No, we don't teach that.
Yes.
That's more of a separate thing that I teach people. Just kidding.
Little side hustle.
Yeah, a little side hustle. You got to make a little money every now and then. But there's some really cool stuff happening with the classes, honestly, and like some fun stuff potentially in the future too. Mm-hmm. So stay tuned, people. Right. But our level 2, our level 2 grads are going to be finishing up by the time that this airs. So we're excited. It's been a fun class. It's been a really cool class, and they've learned a lot, and I've learned a lot from it. So it's been cool. Right. What do you like about it so far? What's been some of your favorite moments here, or like just something that stood out to you?
I think the willingness of people that are already in the class to have their sessions shown, like they privately get sessions.
Yeah.
And that they're willing to have that displayed to the people that they've been in class with on the Zoom. So yeah, we've done a few of those. And then some people that have done other classes, but just watching people upgrade their questions. The more that they learn, the better the questions are and the comments. And you just see more and more people starting to get this. And it just reminds me that people who come in and people might come in and have 1, 2, 3, 4 sessions and really feel like, wow, this has made a huge change in their life. And it has. But then when people start to jump in at the level of a class, I'm not trying to promote something. We don't even have another one planned. So it's not like we've got it right around the corner and I'm giving a commercial. But when people start to understand the why behind things and the how behind things, it really takes them deeper with Jesus. And one person who recently got a session that was shown said, I just kept on going after we were done for the next day or 2 or 3. It's like, there's still more there in that moment. And I just can't tell you how much that lights me up, that they're continuing to go after it with Jesus and to take a look at what else is going on that needs to be cleaned up. So that's awesome.
Well, exactly. And like, just expanding on that, now that they've learned what they have in class, they can do it on their own. They can continue that process well beyond, the time that a facilitator has. They can like keep doing the work with Jesus. So it's really cool. It's really cool to see them utilizing those tools.
Right.
So.
Paul prays in Ephesians 3 that we would be rooted and established in love. Love that surpasses knowledge so that we may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. At Cross Counsel, it's miraculous to watch people transform by the love and truth of Jesus. But some people need a little extra help. We never turn anyone away because of their inability to cover their session fees. Would you be willing to cover that cost for somebody who is looking for freedom from something in their life? We are inviting you to be a part of what Cross Counsel is doing here. Would you be willing to donate to cover someone? Bless them, though you've never met them. You can do that today at crosscounsel.com.
I think we can just jump right into it. We are on part 5 of our trauma series. Thank you, everyone who's been listening, who's been on a very long, very good road here with us. We ended part 4 last week with the woman who was brought before Jesus and that whole story and the trauma that was caused and kind of her perspective. It's a great episode if you haven't seen it already. Episode 4 of Tackling Trauma. Go check it out. But yeah, just picking up from there. Go ahead. Like, where do we want to start with this?
So I thought I'd ask you a question. Okay, have you ever
lay it on me?
Oh, two questions, of course.
Okay.
The first one, have you ever heard the term "don't cry over spilled milk"?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
And so when you hear that, what's the intent of that little idiom that we have?
I mean, it ideally it's don't make a big deal out of little things. The Midwesterner in me is like, okay, but like still be concerned. Like that's lost dairy. Like we don't do that here. But but yes, I get it. Like don't overblow the little details.
Right. And I think there is much to be said for that, right? But it's also what's also implied is like, don't dwell on things that have already happened. Like you can't unspill the milk. Okay. So it's like, well, there is, I think, a bit of a sense as well of forget about it, clean it up, but just forget about it. And I do believe in moving forward, but I also believe in making sure we attend to those things that still need to be in our hearts cleaned up. You can clean the milk up, but there's so many different implications and ramifications and consequences to some of those moments. So I just thought that we would go through a scenario of spilled milk to talk about that. Can be a traumatizing thing for a child. And we've, in my mind, I think about 4 different levels of trauma, and with 4 different, that is like 4 different levels of bad things that could happen. And this is just subjective. This is just me and my experience trying to come up with ways to explain things to people. It's not like there's, and maybe there are great psychologists out there that say that there are 4 levels of trauma. I'm not aware of that. I'm sure you can Google that. But what caused me to think about that is the idea of the stages of cancer and how that is measured with people. So you can have even stage 0 cancer. And when you've got stage 0 cancer, you just have to address it. It's not a cancer that's spread anywhere. I think most of those, I'm not exactly sure, could be like skin cancer things, just things that are like that. But it's just like abnormal cells. In fact, you could have an examination and possibly, depending on what kind of doctor you're seeing, they could possibly just shave off a mole, something that looks like a mole or a growth that looks like that doesn't look awesome. I don't know if they do that in the first examination or if they still have to, however they test that. I'm not sure, but the stage 0 means that the cancer hasn't invaded nearby tissues yet. Then you've got stage 1, so it's still small and contained, and wherever it started, it still hasn't spread and it hasn't gotten to the lymph nodes or other organs, because that becomes a big deal. Jenny was stage 2 when she was first diagnosed several years ago. And one of the things I had heard of the lymph system and lymph nodes, but when you're in high school, how much do you really pay attention to that stuff unless you want to be a doctor?
Sure.
But they had to actually take a couple lymph nodes. They had to do surgery, and they removed some of the mass that was there, and they also wanted to look for margins so that you see whether the cancer spread or not. And they also, I don't know if the term is harvest, but they harvest lymph nodes because that's a big deal. And thankfully, in Jenny's case, it hadn't spread there, because then you start to get into stage 3 cancer, and that's when it has spread to the lymph nodes, but it hasn't quite gotten into other organs. And then stage 4, which is horrible. That means that it's spread from probably through the lymph nodes to other organs, and that's when it's called metastasized. If you've heard of a metastatic, like breast cancer, it starts in the breast, but then it's gotten to these other organs, and that's very serious, to say the least. So that was just kind of a general framework that I used when I was thinking about different levels of trauma, with things that happen to us. But also, when we talk about PTSD, it really fits into the idea that it's not just what's happened to us, it's how we've interpreted what's happened to us. So the P in PTSD is post. That means the trauma is over. Okay. So post-traumatic, post the trauma that has happened, there's a stress disorder that happens. And I even wanted to touch on that, because I'll ask you this off the top of my head, when you hear of somebody having a disorder, what do you think?
I think that that's such a general, broad, all-encompassing term. It could be like a learning disorder, which could be anything, and I'm no pro at this sort of thing, but like a learning disorder could be as small as like light ADHD, or like as like serious as like maybe Asperger's or like Down syndrome, stuff like that. And beyond that, again, not an expert, but I kind of look at it like, okay, everyone's got some sort of disorder here. I'm going to need more specifics to know kind of what we're dealing with.
Right. Because there's a difference between, and I don't know if a learning disorder, maybe that's a thing. There's learning disabilities, and maybe there are learning disorders. Where I'm going is there's a difference between a disorder and a disability. A disability means that somebody either can't do it or are highly challenged to be able to do something. When I think about somebody having a disorder when it comes to mental or emotional things, I understand that there's a problem. There are things going on that aren't good. Let's say that somebody has an eating disorder. Okay. So even beyond the labeling of what something is, what's actually happening in something like an eating disorder is the brain has decided to order things in a way that aren't as functional as other people want to look at. So somebody who is struggling with something like anorexia, their brain is actually highly ordered in the protective scheme or system. What they're trying to do is trying to control something, because somebody with a disorder like anorexia, the mind says, I can't control this in my life, or I can't control what happened in my past, but I can control what I eat or what I don't eat. And so it's actually a highly complex system of thought that goes into what we call disorders. So does that make sense? Am I explaining that okay?
Yeah, I think I'm following you on this.
It's actually a strategy to avoid pain.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I feel you.
So that's really important to point out too. So anyway, back to the idea of spilled milk. Okay.
Right.
So let's just say, let's set the stage with a kid named Billy. Okay. Let's say
Billy.
Billy is, yep. Why not? Billy. That's a good American
Billy
name, right?
works. Yeah.
All right. Yes. So let's say Billy's 10 years old and mom and dad are there at the dining room table. He's got a 12-year-old brother. You can name him if you want. I don't want to take the energy, but he's got a 12-year-old brother at the table and an 8-year-old sister. Okay. So halfway through the meal, Billy isn't paying attention and he spills milk all over the table. And it's the second time that week. So just with what I've explained there, do you think that in and of itself for Billy would be a traumatizing moment?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
Not the act itself.
Okay. It's the second time he's done it that week.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I would say that's possible. He could have like, that could be maybe a level 1. I don't know, maybe even 0.
Or like a 0.
1. Yeah.
Okay, I could give you a 0. Sure.
Thanks for that. Okay.
I'll allow it.
so we're trying to keep this. So thank you. I appreciate that. You need a gavel.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Go ahead, please.
So let's just keeping it simple. Okay. So
yeah,
let's say after the milk is spilled, just everyone at the table sort of shakes their head and mom grabs a dish rag to have Billy clean it up. She comes, okay, here it is. So it's not an awesome situation, but it could be level 0, level 1, lowercase moment of trauma. Okay. Because of the reaction. Doesn't seem bad, right? I think there are people that would give their right arm for that kind of a family reaction to things compared to what they've experienced. Okay.
Sure.
So in another way that I just visually see it, and I'm probably going to overcomplicate things, but when I think about trauma or PTSD, when I think of level 1, I think of lowercase. Like in my mind with PTSD, there's a lowercase PTSD. That's like level 1. Okay. And then when you get to level 2, let's just say it's lowercase bold. Okay. So again, I'm probably overcomplicating things. So same scenario, spills the milk, mom grabs the dish rag, but Billy can see her frustration. Okay. She's obviously upset. And his brother says, I don't know, what would a brother say? Smooth move, Butterfingers, something like that. That would be
sure. I like that.
So Butterfingers. Anyway, so his 8-year-old sister maybe giggles and dad has this heavy sigh of exasperation and he mumbles something under his breath. And maybe Billy even notices that he's clenching his fist. Okay. Where would you, so that's where I would maybe put that at a level 2.
Yeah, like lowercase bold.
Yeah, lowercase bold, something like that. That's, and again, we're just talking about the situation itself. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's just ramp this up a bit. And now in addition, dad cusses at Billy and he smacks him in the face and he sends him to his room. Okay.
Yeah.
And as he's leaving, knowing that he's not even going to have dinner, he's not going to be able to finish his meal. He as he was walking away, dad smacks him even harder on the back of the head, let's say, and he smacks him so hard that he hits the floor. And when he gets up and is about to cry, dad cusses at him again and calls him a worthless piece of garbage. Okay. So that's notched it up a bit to level 3.
Yeah, that 2 to 3 jump is something serious.
Right. We're just generally speaking, right? So maybe I call that uppercase trauma and potentially uppercase PTSD. Okay. So, but in the 4th scenario, add to that after dinner, dad comes into his bedroom and just beats on him and calls him more names and cusses at him. Okay. So that we can take that, just, there's the smack, the 2 smacks before is bad enough, but then if he just yells and screams at him and does whatever, that can take it to that uppercase bold PTSD. Okay. And let's even say that 20 years later, as he and his brother talk about it, they even laugh about, hey, remember that time where you spilled your milk for the second time that week, and that dad smacked you around a little bit. And yeah, that was dad, you know, he didn't know any better. And you could say, well, yeah, I have trauma from that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So as we go through those 4 different levels of what happened, there's potentially opportunity for ministry in each one of those sessions, if it was just what it was. Okay.
Sure.
And, and that was just this isolated case of what happened. And in
Mm-hmm.
any one of those, Billy could believe things like I'm worthless. And he could even get a sense of I'm alone and I'm stupid and I am a piece of garbage. All
Mm-hmm.
those things at different levels. The power is in the lie. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
if somebody was just talking about what happened, and let's even say that it was the level 2 scenario of the trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and people look at it and go, well, you know, get over it. That's not a big deal. But when it comes to what we do, there are things that are so connected. And so and it's what we believe, but add to that, let's just say 3 weeks before that dinner, that Billy was at somebody else's house. Let's say that Billy was at Tommy's house. And at Tommy's house, Tommy did something wrong and dad smacked him around and screamed at him and yelled at him. And Billy just was a witness to all this. And he saw a level 4 trauma with his own eyes. And he didn't know what to do. And he believed he was helpless. He was trapped. He couldn't do this. And he took on some of Tommy's pain as well.
Sure.
And he bought into all these different things. Now you take what got planted and rooted inside of Billy in that experience, and then 3 weeks later, he has his own experience. The way that the brain works with association, it just ties that stuff together. So you can have an event that just seems like it's a level 2 kind of experience or trauma, but the way that the mind takes it, it makes it into a 4.
Hey, folks, we had a bit of a technical problem with our internet connection here. It's a little spotty today, so we hope that final thought there was making sense about our scenario with Tommy's house versus Billy's house, and Billy seeing that level 4 trauma happening to Tommy, and then kind of carrying that with him as he went back and experienced his own stuff, and how that affected and built up onto that new kind of scenario that he was in his own home. We hope that made sense. We're going to wrap it up here because we don't have a lot of time to go back and play around with edits and stuff. But Steve, if you had some final thoughts, we'd love to hear them.
I think one of the last things I wanted to wrap up with was just the idea of trauma brain. Have you heard that term before?
No.
Okay. So again, it's one of those colloquial terms that's used to describe the impact of experiencing trauma, because there actually are chemical reactions that happen. And there's a whole lot of detail in that. So, but it still comes down to how we've interpreted things. And one of the results of that, when people have this thing called trauma brain, which again isn't a scientific thing as much as just a way to explain things, people that become very hyper vigilant, it's that alert system. There's a God-given alert system that we have when there's danger, but when we've interpreted life through a lens of constant danger, like we're still in this loop of danger, then of course it's understandable that the brain would be geared toward always being on the lookout. And so that's important to recognize. If you realize that you're hyper vigilant, even if it's about doing your books or how you do your garden, if there can even be hyper vigilance in that comes from things that you've experienced and how you've interpreted those things. So it's important to be really aware of that. And before I forget, because I never want to forget this, just because we have been diagnosed with something or have something doesn't mean that you can't find healing and freedom from Jesus. It's like when you do hear that somebody has this awful diagnosis, as believers, we pray and hopefully believing that God can intervene in some way. But I don't know how much we really think about that when it comes to some of the emotional issues. It's like, well, that's just what that person has. That's just what they have to deal with. But I do believe that in traumatic situations, when the mind interprets things the way it does, the brain does say, you need to be alert, you need to be aware, you need to, whatever that thing is. And I think there can be chemical imbalances in the brain because it's trying to overcompensate for pain. So the more that we courageously take a look at some of those places where those lies have infested us, the more truth that we experience. And of course, whenever we experience truth from Jesus, peace always follows. And I do believe with my whole heart that there can then be a change chemically in the brain, because the way I think of it is the brain says, okay, we no longer need to give this much attention to this part of your brain because things have been settled. So I think that's really important. So anyway, I'm not an expert on all the different ways that trauma brain is described, but there are people that have flashbacks. There's people that just are haunted by memories. I think they're called intrusive memories. You just can't shake it. It's so vivid in their mind that it's something happens and they're right back to being in the basement with something bad happening to them. They're back on the playground. They're back wherever. And it causes them to have a difficult time remembering things or concentrating on things as well. Some people say, well, I have a really bad memory. Again, back to what we were talking about before with disorders. A bad memory can actually be a part of the brain that says, forget that whole area of your life, forget that whole time period. So that's very organized. And it's, again, a protective layer that we have. But it's not, a lot of people say, well, I don't remember my childhood, but when they step into the melt process and follow the emotion, they are blown away with what starts to emerge, whether it's in the first session or the fifth session. It's, well, you talked about that too in the last session.
Yeah.
Like, boom. Wow. So yeah, there's a lot of different things. We can become dysregulated, or we don't really get into dissociation on the podcast very much. There are podcasts out there that can talk about that. Maybe at some point we might talk a little bit more about what happens when people fracture, when the brain says, okay, part of you has to stay in this trauma that you're experiencing, but the rest of me is out of here. And so that is another ordered way of escaping pain as much as is possible. So a lot of other impacts with people who have been labeled with trauma brain again. And we just don't care too deeply about labels. We want to find healing.
Really, yeah.
Right. That's the most important thing, is to find healing and freedom, whatever your label is. Jesus can go beyond that. And that's not just this ethereal thought. It's a very tangible thing. When you watch people, when the love of God starts to take shape in them in a different way, in a deeper way, I should say, a lot of that stuff just starts to go by the wayside. So it's pretty sweet. Doesn't
really
mean
good stuff.
Everything. Yeah, it is. It's amazing.
Well, good talk, man. This was a great series. It was great exploring this.
Yep, scratching the surface of exploration.
Yeah. There's the tip of the iceberg, everyone.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much.
This has been the Cross Counsel Podcast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, share with your friends, and look for us on social media. The world will become a much better place, and Jesus will be seen in a much better light the more we are transformed by His truth and love. We'll see you next time, everybody.